Can you tell us a little bit, Asma, about when we talk about South Asian countries, what do we actually mean? What countries make up the South Asian countries?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Vic. Um, so there are quite a few. The main ones are that people know generally are Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, but there are others that people might not be aware of. So there's Afghanistan, Bhutan, part of the Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and parts of Iran. So there's quite a few countries that combine to make the South Asian community.
It's a very large area, isn't it, when you look at it on the map and you consider the diversity in language, religion, countries. It's a huge area, really, isn't it? And what percentage of people in the UK are from South Asian heritage? Do you know the stats around that, Asma?
Yeah, so it's a difficult one because it's not, we don't know if it's entirely correct, but going on the censuses that we have in the UK, they say that there's approximately, so that doing combined ethnic minority communities in general make up 13.9%, so just under 14% of the UK population, and from the South Asian communities. But this, I think it focuses mainly on Pakistani, Indian, and Bangladeshi communities, make up 3.9% of the total UK population. That was in 2001. And in 2011, it says the figure has risen to 5.3%.
So we're talking about a sizable number of people in the UK population who are from this background, this heritage, and I suspect that of people are going to be in potentially different areas as well. So some areas they might be a higher percentage of people from a South Asian background to within other areas, or are people fairly dispersed throughout the UK? Do you know any statistics around that?
No, I don't. That's again very difficult. There are large areas. They say that when people came across from these countries, they stayed together to protect each other, to look after each other. And so there are large communities in different places. So up north, there's certain areas where there's larger communities, and the same as down south. But there's not very clear data as to which areas are really highly populated and which aren't so much.
Yeah, and that's the same with my family are of Irish background, and but people stayed together, and that was quite common, wasn't it, to kind of stay with people who had similar backgrounds and heritage, and and to do that. So that I think that's fairly typical, really, when people immigrate into new countries. So out of that group, and I guess I'm imagining it's fairly difficult to drill down into how many people might be living with a diagnosis of dementia, and whenever we look at dementia stats, it's always hard because we know that people will live with dementia for a long time sometimes before they actually get their diagnosis, and that's always been the case. And obviously COVID and people, that as itself providing a barrier to diagnosis will have undoubtedly had an impact. But have we got any figures around what percentage of people might be living with dementia from a South Asian background?
Not specifically for the South Asian communities, but there are general figures. So, for example, roughly 850,000 people living with dementia in the UK. That's a total population. But from that, there is data to show that there's 25,000 people from ethnic minority communities with dementia in England and Wales, so not the UK specifically, but England and Wales. And there's a forecast to show that actually this number will rise to 50,000 by 2026, so in a couple of years' time, and over 172,000 by 2051, which is apparently nearly a sevenfold increase. But again, that's not for just South Asian communities, that's for all ethnic minorities. I did try and deep dive a little bit, but the figures are really, really hard to ascertain in terms of dividing it into specific communities. It was difficult. But I think what's important to note is that as we know that the prevalence of dementia is going up in the UK for all communities, so it will definitely rise for South Asian communities.
Mhm. And are they certain? I know when I was doing some research before the session tonight, I was thinking about certain things that might make people more at risk of developing dementia from South Asian communities, and I was reading some statistics around heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and all of these things, and how they can increase someone's risk. And is that correct, what I've been reading? Is there anything you to add around that?
No, that's absolutely spot on. I think there's the Mary Adin Trust have been doing lots of research around this, and they've said exactly what you've said, that there's much higher risks because people from the South Asian communities are generally at higher risk for cardiovascular diseases, so heart attacks, strokes, um, higher risk of developing diabetes and hypertension, and so that automatically puts you at higher risk of developing certain types of dementias, for example, our vascular dementias and things like that.
And so that's something that I think, because of that, because we know there's that higher risk, surely, when you think about it, we should be doing as much as possible to try and prevent that, to kind of work with people so that they understand the things that they can do to prevent their risks. And certainly, I think of things like heart disease and stroke and diabetes, there's things that people can do that would prevent their risk of developing these things, which then would prevent their risk of developing dementia. So I guess that's one of the things that is much being done around that. So do you know, in the South Asian communities, around how do we prevent and live healthier?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of health promotion going on. Obviously, there's always going to be more and more that we can do, but there is a lot of health promotion around our diet control. It's general things that we say in terms of health promotion for all communities, but that diet, healthy living, so exercise if you can. I always say, when I say exercise, I always want people to know that it doesn't mean running for half an hour. A gentle stroll for 20 to 30 minutes is just as good, just as effective. It's just getting that blood pumping.
Mm.
And then if you're smoking, if you can reduce your smoking. So some people, people don't want to completely give up, and that's fine. But if you can reduce your amounts of smoking in the same way, reducing your alcohol intake, there's lots of steps that people can take to actively live a healthier lifestyle, and that would definitely help.
And is there, in terms of, I can imagine some of these things could potentially be barriers as well, because you may not feel able to interact with some of these things, or you might have always chewed tobacco or smoked, or never gone to a gym. So that these things could potentially be barriers for anybody, actually, couldn't they? But is there additional barriers for people from a South Asian background, or is that an assumption that I'm making that might not be correct?
No, I've done a lot of research on this, Vic, and there's so many barriers. The All Party Parliamentary Group also did lots of research on this, and this is just I got some of my data from. But some of the barriers that they said that there are is that actually, in terms of the levels of dementia awareness, it's quite low within all ethnic minorities, but South Asian in particular. So actually that would mean that people aren't aware of it, so therefore they wouldn't then access the services and support services, or access any form of like getting a diagnosis or anything in that regard. And it's also, dementia is really highly stigmatized in some of our communities. So people would then also be less likely to access the services for support because they don't want to get that stigma attached to them. And sadly, there's lots of stories my background is Indian, and in Indian communities as well as other South Asian communities, that actually it affects your social status. So, for example, there are families that won't marry into certain families because actually they think that it's a disease that can be passed down, and so they don't want that one affected to their potential children or grandchildren, so they won't get their families married into it. There's also other barriers such as cultural beliefs. So this is not completely South Asian, but from the Zimbabwean community, for example, there's a Civic Crow community who have people who can hear voices. They can hear people from that have died. They can communicate with them, and actually they found that their biggest barrier when they came to the UK, they were automatically told that this isn't true. And actually, when they're in Zimbabwe, they're actually really they're like seen as role models and actually inspired, and they are leaders of their communities. And when they come to England, we kind of put up a barrier and say, it's not true, and you're not hearing these voices, and actually there's something going on, and automatically we built up barriers against these communities, which is really sad to hear, actually.
It really is, and I know when we were talking in preparation for this space, I think it was Mac actually who mentioned that it can also be just seen as a taboo, and I think that's what you were talking earlier on about, Asma, isn't it? About people not wanting to marry into a family if somebody's got a diagnosis of dementia in that family, and the idea that something like dementia could be seen as a taboo, and it can seem quite shocking in a way to Western ears, to sort of hear that and to think, because we know that it's something that people live with, and they can live well with it and for many years, and the idea that it could somehow be seen as a taboo to have that a diagnosis of dementia is that still prevalent, do you think, Asma? And I think, Mac, you would mention that before. So do you think that there is still that sense of taboo around a diagnosis?
Let Asma go first, and then.
Okay, perfect. Asma, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that there's such a stigma still around dementia. And I think that goes for all communities. So I think if we compare it to something like, for example, cancer, even say 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was a high taboo around cancer. Now, we wouldn't really say the C word, but actually, even in the Western community, that's gone down and that's changed. So I think it's in the same way. I know that we would be happier if it wasn't such a taboo, but actually we can take the same steps that they did in terms of raising the awareness about cancer. We can do the same with dementia.
Perfect, fantastic answer. Mac, what was your feelings about that? About it being a taboo? Is that something you'd experienced?
I think what we need to remember is that when you mention the word stigma, what it means is, in real fact, it's a mark of disgrace. You're either crazy, you're incompetent, you're dangerous, you're unpredictable. All these things are associated with the stigma. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an illness or a disease of this nature. I mean, other issues are also there, and people are hesitant to go out and do things after for racism. So that's sort of a stigma. But I believe that it's basic education that's needed. Because the minute you mention the word dementia, because I believe this is what I think, that because it is so closely linked or related to demented, people automatically assume that that person is mad, daft, is crazy. So because of that reason, most people don't want to admit that they've got dementia.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the reason where most of South Asian families that I've been in contact with, and now I've been living with this diagnosis for a long time, I can actually spot some of the things that the normal people can't, because I have lived through that, and I know where that person is. And I can sort of read between the lines. And I often think that, there is a lot of confusion and there is a lot of work to be done. Because for a start, as you know, within these South Asian languages, there's no word for dementia. So that's another reason why we have to struggle with this, and then try and convince somebody that there is help available. Uh, Although there's no cure for it, but help is there. You can have comfortable life, a reasonable life, a good life with the right support. So it is difficult, yeah.
Yeah, and what you said there, Mac, I remember you were talking in preparation to me about this, and we were talking about language and the fact that there is no word for dementia in many languages, and I guess, and I don't know if this is a question for you more, Asma, than you, Mac, but feel free for either of you to answer it. I guess actually language itself could be a barrier to getting a diagnosis because I guess if somebody doesn't speak English and they're living in England and they're or in the United Kingdom and they're experiencing some type of decline, some kind of problems, actually they might be relying on their first language and actually do we have screening tools, diagnostic tests available? And I don't know what percentage of people, certainly from if I think just at this moment about the over 65 population, what percentage of people might actually speak good English, and whether that people often do revert back to their native tongues as well. So that in itself is probably a barrier. Anything I don't know, is that something you've experienced, Asma, or am I way off on that?
No, I think you're spot on, Vic. There is some, I don't know how accurate this information is, but there is some evidence to show that actually language barrier is a massive barrier. Language itself is a massive barrier. And they say that 35% of older people, so that's people aged over the age of 65, from South Asian communities can speak English. And only 21%, sorry, can read and write English. So actually, if we're looking at that population coming into using our services, actually, we don't have services. So I'm talking about Gloucestershire in particular, because that's where I'm from. But we don't have the services properly installed to provide the best care for them. And I know I'm going to. Gloucestershire is an amazing place to live and work, and I know that between the acute trust and the community trust there's lots of work going on to improve the care. So for example, we did a dementia information event for some of our ethnic minority communities, and we had lots of people from the Gujarati community and lots of people from the Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities, and it was really well received event. And our community trusts have done lots of work in terms of making promotional videos in Gujarati, for example, to try and help raise awareness. And there is lots of work still going on in Gloucestershire. But I think it's like I said to someone the other day, it's pigeon steps. We've got to take small steps. We can't change the world overnight, but we can take pigeon steps to like Mac was saying, we need to raise awareness about it. Mac was talking about there's no specific word for dementia in some of our languages, and he's absolutely right. And I think even going back to the English terminology, so if dementia comes from a Latin word which means mad, so in itself it has such negative connotations to it. I know in Hindi there's a word that we generally use that says pagal, which means crazy. And in Gujarati, we use a word called unmad, which means lunacy or hysteria. So all of them together are such negative connotations around dementia, which doesn't need to have such negative connotations. Because, like you said, Vic, people can live really well with it, with the right support and the right diagnosis and right support. You can live really well with dementia.
Yeah, it's so true. And I was in my head when you were talking, I was thinking about all of those words, and they're all negative words, aren't they? They're all words that imply a loss of mind, loss of self. Without, and it doesn't have to be like that. Having a diagnosis, and I know, Mac, you're probably chomping at the bit, so I'm going to come to you in a second, I promise. But one of the things I again, when I was researching for this space this evening, I was looking at a tool that we use quite frequently in assessing people, which is the mini mental state examination. And actually, there's all sorts of things that you could fault in terms of that tool anyway, for all sorts of people, for all sorts of reasons. It doesn't always work very well, and it gives a fairly crude marker of what's potentially going on for that person. And I'd done some research that I'd found that there have a screening instrument has been introduced, which is in Gujarati, which has been used in Leicester, and I thought that's fantastic. But of course, I guess if you don't happen to speak Gujarati, or if you've, if you've got those barriers, that stigma, the that reluctance to engage as well, it'd be interesting to know how widely used that screening tool is in Leicester, and actually the difference it's made. And I think it's fairly early on still, so they've perhaps not got some of the evidence around that yet. The other thing that I was looking at is some tools. So I've shared them up in the top. So in the nest, which is the thing at the top of this space, you'll see all sorts of things. And one of them is actually a resource that I discovered, which was around sort of supports and tools and diagnosis for people from a South Asian background. Mac, I can see your hand up. You're being very formal. Sorry. What were you wanting to add?
No, no worries, no worries. Yeah, I think it's confused, and most people associate it with mental illness, and that is not just normal people; it's professionals as well. I myself was treated for anxiety and depression for 6 years before the diagnosis of dementia came about, and I may as well take this opportunity while I'm on to say that my I didn't have any symptoms. That's number one. No symptoms at all. I was working away fine. I was a professional. I was accountant. I had a decent job, earning a decent living, and I had heart problems. I had major heart surgery, and because of that heart surgery, apparently in them days they do a brain scan after the surgery, and I, of course, was out of it. I was under the anesthetic, and they did this brain scan, and that's when my dementia showed up. Uh, and can you imagine somebody who's recovering from a major surgery, and then all of a sudden they say your brain isn't working either?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they
And you
stop.
hadn't had any symptoms. I was just going to come on to ask you some questions, Mac. And you hadn't had any symptoms at all up until that point.
No, nothing at all. I didn't
And
even know about my heart condition. In all honesty, uh,
um,
I had a minor heart attack when I was at home, and I went to the hospital, and they said, "Right, we're going to operate on you. We don't know whether you've got 6 seconds or 6 minutes to live."
and
Uh,
how old were you when this happened?
I was 52.
52. So very, very young, and like you said, working as an accountant, a responsible, important job, and and this must have been quite a shock for you to hear this when you came around from your surgery. Before that, can you remember? Before this even happened, what was your awareness like around dementia? Had you heard the word? Did you have any kind of thoughts yourself about it?
This is why you were discussing this earlier, and that's when I put my hand up. Because we are talking about people that English is not their first language. But let me tell you that there is nothing about dementia for people that have got English as their first language. Bulk of it is on the net, and you have to remember that not everybody is able to use the website to its fullest, or to get the information you need. I myself, it took me ages. To a certain extent, I was computer literate, and I can't speak the language. But I feel that there isn't enough even for English people, speaking people. It took me, 10 years before I found out that Alzheimer's Society existed.
Yeah.
There's nothing out there at all.
And you're absolutely right, because actually when someone's younger as well, and they are, they receive this diagnosis, and whether they're experiencing symptoms or not, we know that it can take longer to get a diagnosis, get the support you need. And like you say, even if you haven't, you're English by background, you've not, whatever, you've not got, you've not got that further barrier. It can still be really difficult to navigate your way through services to get that diagnosis, and to understand and to find what services are there to support you. And we don't, even now, I think people don't expect somebody in their 50s to be developing dementia. We always think about it still as being something that affects much older people, whereas actually it can affect people who are much younger, as you were talking there. So when you received this diagnosis, did you? I noticed on your picture you've got loads of people around you. So is that your family? Do you have a family, Mac?
Yes, these are my grandchildren.
Uh,
Uh, yeah, I live with my family. I live with my children. I am married, but my wife is abroad. She doesn't live in this country.
okay.
And you know, there are quite a lot of issues that people seem to overlook. For instance, I had a lucrative job, lucrative earnings, and then once you're diagnosed, your sort of working life ends, and then you have to go and claim benefits for whatever, and then not knowing where to go, not knowing what your entitlement is. So it all brings added stress. I live with my family, and I'm glad that they were around me, my children, helping me out on all this. But the fact remains, and this is something that needs to be addressed, in my opinion, that when one person is diagnosed with dementia, the whole family is diagnosed with dementia because every single person is affected. And this is something that's overlooked, even by the professionals, I believe, and there is support that's needed for them. I mean, the condition that I have, it affects the speech, behavior, problems, and solving, problems, planning, and even emotions. And all these things need some sort of sport to be able to pull through this. And
Yeah.
I believe that there isn't a lot about, even for English speaking people. So a lot needs to be done, I think.
Yeah, I do agree with you, and I think that's partly why at Dementia UK we exist in the first place, because we know that a diagnosis of dementia, it impacts the whole family. It always does, and everybody around. And we know that actually it can be really confusing. It can be really hard, and many people struggle to get the right information, to get the right support, to know who to turn to, who's an expert who they can rely on, rather than, just finding out information online. And so that's exactly why we started our charity to work, and nurses like Asma and one of our Admiral nurses are there to provide support for families living with diagnosis of dementia or with a suspected diagnosis. But we've only got at the moment about 380 something, I'm not quite sure, I think 87 Admiral nurses working in the UK. So, we desperately need to grow the model and to have more nurses working. And actually, I've shared a job link up, because we have got a job available at the moment in Leicester, which is specifically looking for an Admiral nurse to work with people from a South Asian background, from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds. So, that's quite exciting that we're starting to see some posts developing that are specifically looking at targeting resource into certain communities, as well, to try and improve awareness, improve support, because I think the impact can be huge. And if we're mindful of what you were saying, both of you, on earlier on, about the taboo and how that might present itself in a family, then I guess the more we can do to break down that stigma, to break down some of those barriers, and to improve awareness, then the better, really. I'm just going to remind people, if anybody wants to speak today, anybody wants to request the mic, do so. So I think Keith has requested the mic, and I also see somebody else, Hapo, who has requested the mic, and also Noor Spaces. So I'm going to bring Keith up first. to ask a question. And then I'm going to try and bring other people up as well, see what questions people want to ask us this evening. So, Keith, I think I brought you up because you asked first, and hopefully you're now up and able to unmute and ask a question. I don't know if it's a question for myself or a question for either Mac or Asma, but you're on the stage with us now, and you're most welcome to unmute and ask your question. Keith, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Whilst we're trying to do that, I don't know if Keith's mic's working or if he's not able to unmute. I'm going to invite Noir Space up as well. So I'm just going to say, I think you should be up as a speaker. Perfect.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome to our Twitter Space this evening.
No, hi there, Vic, and it's glad to be here again. Sorry if I'm echoing slightly. And it's great to just see you obviously sharing and promoting awareness of this particular topic, which I think is fantastic, and we do need a lot of, which is happening. The biggest thing which I found amazing is that I like what Max mentioned from a personal perspective. And I also talk from someone that's supported like a family member going through dementia. So anything I share at the moment isn't from a clinical perspective. And sorry, my name is Jay, everybody, in terms of just knowing who I am. And yeah, I represent Noir Space, which is a mobile app that's designed to kind of connect small, medium enterprises with graduates. But moving away from that, my kind of perspective is here on a personal basis, really, to kind of just share my thoughts and understanding. But I think the really good points that were really raised here, and it does appeal to any kind of minority group. And I think it was ideally heavily mentioned, which is the education piece. I think that's really, really important, that we continue to educate each other in terms of experiences that we're currently going through. And by just because we all understand there's a lot of information out there as well, whereby we can all access the same information. But I think another key part of that is understanding the information, because it is tailored to the needs of that individual, and not every person going through dementia is obviously going to experience it the same way. However, though, it's still, I find, very important to have these mechanisms and these forums that we have at the moment to share your experiences openly and be open to kind of engage with others to kind of obviously help them where you may have went wrong, or what actually might be working better for yourselves. But I also want to put a question out there as well to Max, particularly in terms of like, from a personal experience, what kind of mechanisms or methods or tools do you think was the most useful in helping you kind of self-manage, and also helping your family as well, you through what you're currently been going through, as I said, in terms of dementia, when you first experienced it, and obviously ongoing at the moment, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I think the first thing, and that is the hardest thing to do, is to admit that you've got a condition.
Yeah.
Because once you admit that you have something, and it's not easy to admit dementia
No.
for two reasons. One is, like you were saying, there's not much out there for us to read or look at.
Yeah.
And not knowing much about the condition, and knowing the little that you know is the last sort of stage one can be at. It's all frightening.
True.
It's not easy to accept. And once you realize that you've got a condition, and as of yet there's no cure for it, there's only one outcome.
Exactly.
And once you come to term with that, I think it makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And what I found helped was, I actually, because originally, when I was first diagnosed, I went into a lockdown.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't go out. I didn't speak to anybody, just in case I say something out of place and I might offend somebody because of this condition.
Yeah.
And it was frightening. It took me 2 years to tell my family about it.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell them straight away because they were already around me, because I was recovering from a 12-hour operation and 22 days in hospital.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it was a lot. But what I found that really worked for me was meeting people with the same condition.
Yeah.
In other words, peer sport.
Yeah.
For me, that's top of the list.
No, it's okay.
Because that way at least you get to know how other people are managing, and then you can relate to them. And I've also found that people living with dementia connect better with people living with dementia,
Exactly. Like,
and more so than the professionals. And the other thing that I found about the professional was that, they always say that if you met one person with dementia, you met one person with dementia,
yeah,
but they don't actually practice that.
yeah,
Even in the memory clinic, when they do the test, it's the same test for every single person.
yeah,
And that I believe is something that needs to be looked at. I've actually written an article on that one for a magazine,
okay,
on the test, and how they do it and what they do, because I'm still me, and
yeah,
and of course the background of that person,
yeah,
the type of industry he or she has worked in,
mm,
the surroundings that they've lived,
mm,
and and their ethnicity, their languages that they speak, the food that they eat, everything has a bearing on dementia pathways,
agree.
and it needs to be understood. And out there isn't much. I mean, I was introduced to Admiral nurses
Mm,
about 12 months ago, maybe a bit over,
yeah,
and since then I've met quite a lot, and I still believe that people with dementia should be on the payroll on some of these organizations,
yeah, yeah,
because what I can pick up by talking to somebody in dementia, even a nurse or a professional can't, because they cannot think the way I do.
yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense?
That makes
It,
perfect
it,
sense.
yeah, it
And
completely makes sense. And I think, Mac, you would say that actually this diagnosis, you've met it full on, haven't you? And it's changed. It's changed your life in many ways, because you're now speaking on a very regular basis
mm,
to raise awareness and help people. And I know you've done some tremendous work around actually getting this diagnosis and making sure it's individual, and that people get the support they need once they are diagnosed. Sorry, did you want to say something else there,
yeah,
Rosemary?
yeah. On lastly as well, because I think what he mentioned as well about like the terminology within the culture, that naturally becomes a barrier. I think again, it's about kind of, as he mentioned, about tailoring. Maybe they obviously information is give out generally, but it's also good to have that kind of tailored to the different communities that are actually out there. And I think that kind of ties in naturally as well with what you mentioned as well, Vic, in terms of building representation. So starting to have members from those communities actually working within your organization, so they can obviously give that kind of first-hand experience, and from not just the service perspective, but from a cultural perspective, which I think will be very powerful over time as things go on. And I'll be more than willing to, obviously, when you promote that information, if you haven't done so already, to kind of share that on my platform, just so yeah, you're aware of that from advance.
Yes, please, that would be fantastic. And we're doing so much organisationally to work with and to reach people from every single type of background we can think of, and trying to connect with and understand actually what's their experience of dementia, how can we help them. And one of the things we've done is we've kind of produced some leaflets, and I've shared a link into the nest here
Okay.
in different languages. So we kind of worked through the most commonly spoken South Asian languages and translated some of our leaflets, our information leaflets, into some different languages. So we've got Bengali, Gujarati, Punjabi, Tamil, and Urdu. And the other thing that we're doing is we know that lots of people might not be able to necessarily read English, but they can perhaps understand it if it's
Exactly.
spoken. So,
Yeah.
so we're doing more work around producing videos, short clips that we can put out on YouTube, which are got subtitles but are very image based, so that people can access those resources and follow them, even if they actually can't speak or read English particularly well. So there's stuff that we're doing that way as well to try and help. Mac, go on. You want to come in? I'm surprised. I know Mac isn't always this formal.
No, thank you. I just wanted to say that I have only got 10 more minutes. I'm sorry.
I
I've
know.
got another important meeting.
I
Uh,
know.
I would just like to say that you got my consent. If anybody wants to talk to me, pass my email to them or whatever, and they can connect through Twitter.
Oh,
So if there's any other questions that anybody wants, please do. And in the next 10 minutes, I'm here
You're here.
to answer all your questions.
Absolutely, Keith.
all right, then I'll pass you on.
I
Thank
guess
you very much, though, Vic.
no, thank you so much for joining our space again this evening. It's always great to have you in the space. So I think we had Keith. I think you wanted to ask a question, so I'm just going to come back in case you're able to ask your question now. If you are able to unmute and ask your question, Keith. I'm not sure. Sometimes it's tricky, and it is still a beta platform. It's still very new for Twitter. Oh, you're there, Keith. Can you
I'm
hear
back.
us?
Hello.
You're back.
To be honest with you, I haven't got a question. So I'm sorry, that might be my fault, Vic, for causing confusion. But all I'm saying is thank you very much. These broadcasts, podcasts, whatever you call them, are absolutely brilliant. And to the speakers who are sharing their personal experiences, real life experiences, are absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. That's
No.
what I wanted to do. Thank you.
Well, no, but thank you for coming up to say that, because actually it's reminded me to say something that's really important. So one of the things that we would like to do is grow more stories, and to have more stories that we can share, particularly when when we're talking like we have been this evening about the South Asian community. We'd like to grow more stories as well. So if you're in this space, if you're listening, either if you're listening live or if you're listening to this recording later on Twitter or indeed on YouTube, and you'd like to get in touch with us and share your story, your experience of living with dementia, please do get in touch with us, and we'd love to work with you to share those stories. So do bear that in mind. So we're coming up towards the end, and I'm really mindful that we had that delay at the start, so apologies for that. Mac, I know your time is pushing, but can I ask you all at this point if you can tell us what would be your priorities for improving things? What do you want people to leave this space thinking that's actually something that I would say was number one priority for improving things going forward? What do you think?
My favorite TV detective is Columbo, and on one of his episodes, they asked him how is it that you always get the baddie, and he says all I do is look and listen and look, and I believe that the professionals, if they not just heard us, if they listen to us, bulk of the problem gets sorted.
Yeah,
Because what's happening is that at the moment, and I've come across this so many times on different Zoom sessions. And by the way, over the lockdown, I met over 3,000 people through this technology,
yeah,
WhatsApp and Zoom and Teams and whatever. And this is a problem that everybody has faced, that they seem to talk to you through somebody else. And it's actually talking to the person who's living with it that matters. And that's where you will get the true facts.
yeah,
And also my priority personally would be that to look at and listen and think that maybe I am not able to communicate and pass that on or express my feelings. It doesn't mean that I'm not feeling or experiencing it. So
yeah.
they need to be a bit more vigilant on that, and maybe pay a bit more attention to it.
Yeah, perfect. That's fantastic. Asma, can I ask you the same question? What would your priorities be for improving things going forward?
Yeah, I think I agree with Matt. I think our main priority is raising awareness about dementia, and actually having, so like our engagement event that we had in Gloucestershire in June is we're very proactive in Gloucestershire. We're really proud of that, is that we want to help, and exactly what Matt said is we don't want we don't hear you. We want to actually listen to you and actively listen and make the changes that people like Mac and others are showing us and telling us that actually these are changes. And that's exactly what our engagement events are there for, is that we can hear their challenges, and then we talk to them. We can ask them how they think we can support, and we pop these into place so we can support them. And it has worked really well, and we've got lots more coming up in the future. So my main priority would be that, raising the awareness and breaking some of our barriers down as healthcare professionals, because we don't just want to be seen as knowing what we're doing, because we don't. Mac and people like that are actually they're the experts in it, and we're learning from them, so it's supporting them.
I love what you said there, Asma, about, viewing the person with dementia as the expert, viewing the family as the expert, listening to people. I'm always down for a Columbo reference, because that's always gold. Whatever Columbo says is, I love that. And actually, I think there's other things, isn't there? There's how do we support carers? And you talked about this earlier, Mac, about the impact of the family, and actually, that idea that perhaps it can be seen as such a stigma attached to it, that if the person wouldn't want to accept the diagnosis, wouldn't want to seek support, and for us at Dementia UK, that's something that we need to think about, is actually what can we do to help improve support for carers, for families, being knowledgeable and mindful about this taboo, this barriers that might exist, and working with my fantastic colleague like Asma and Mac to help us improve services. And I guess arguably to look at things like the assessment tools, to make sure that the assessment tools, the screening tools, are culturally appropriate. And we know that, as I said earlier, and we know the faults around these tools, but I guess for me it's going to be that, actually, how can we reach these carers, how can we support people and support those whole families. So we've come to the end of our Twitter space very much, and I know that, Mac, you've really got a hard finish at past. So I want to thank you both for joining me this evening and doing this space with me. The hours always go so fast. I'd like to thank all the speakers for coming up and joining in this evening, and also anybody who's asked questions. I have looked at the chat feature, so thank you to HHPDA for your comment and your question, that your comment that you mentioned there. Our next Twitter space that we're doing in September, we're doing slightly differently, because I felt it was really important that we listened to people and found out, what topics do you want us to cover next, rather than just providing you with the topic and saying, come along and talk about this. So we're opening up a Twitter poll. I think it's probably been tweeted out already, and I'll if we can, we'll attach it into the feedback from this one and the recording. So do have a look at that Twitter poll, and feel free to vote and tell us what you think we should be covering next, what topic's important to you. But thank you, everybody, for your time this evening. If you're listening again on YouTube, hope you enjoyed the session this evening, and do subscribe, because then you'll keep up to date with other sessions and other pieces of work that we push out on YouTube, on the Dementia UK YouTube channel. I'm going to end the space very soon, but thank you massively, Asma, thank you, Mac, and as I say, thank you everybody else who sat and listened in this evening. Thank you, everybody. Take care now. Bye-bye.